Hello everybody, GGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing Ranking of Kings, The Treasure Chest of Courage. So without further ado, let's just hop right into it. So, what is Ranking of Kings, The Treasure Chest of Courage? Basically, it's a bunch of different side stories that weren't fit into the original anime season. The stories would not work with the tone and the plot and things going forward. So instead, it's a bunch of random side stories that are thrown together into episodes, and that created this 10-episode season. And that's basically just what it is, a bunch of random side stories that happen throughout the course of the season. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and we're going to talk about that. So yeah, that wasn't really a story summary, but that does describe what this thing is. And yeah, so let's move on to some spoiler-free thoughts, because that's all I really have to say on that front. Basically, in terms of spoiler-free thoughts, this is a lot of fun. Bojji, as a main character, once again, even though this is a bunch of side stories, steals the light whenever he is on screen, and when the others take their attention to the light, like they get the spotlight focused on them, they're also really good. There are many stories in this season that I feel like are just really fun. And also some dark tones as well, and I do find myself really getting into it. Like, genuinely, I feel like despite the fact this is just a bunch of side stories with no real coherent narrative, they're just kind of moving throughout the whole story of season 1. I had a great time, especially with some of the darker episodes, which I can talk about in the spoiler section. But basically, overall, there's so many really good stories in this that definitely had my investment, especially with how they decided to try to dedicate different stories to different characters, kind of giving us a bit more perspective into all these characters and their thought processes. And it really just made me enjoy these characters a whole lot more, especially since we got to dive more, not just on Bojji, but also on Daida, as well as one of the bad guys from the first season, Oken, and all these other bizarre things that really just bring the whole story together. And I just had such a great time. I genuinely enjoyed it. Do I think it's as good as the main story, you know, the main first season of the whole show? No. But for all the side stories it tells, most of them I genuinely really enjoyed. There are a few that I wasn't super into and I got a bit bored with, but on most occasions, I was fully into it. I was fully just super deep into what was happening. I was having a great time, and it was just hard to find times where I thought, oh, this is not for me. Most of the time, I was having a great time. Even the most mediocre of episodes still had something in there for me to enjoy, even if I didn't love them. And I just enjoyed this so much. It may have just been a bunch of side stories that were telling some random adventures that happened throughout, but I genuinely had such a great time. Again, it wasn't perfect, but it was very enjoyable. And while I think I still prefer the main series more, this little special season type thing was still a lot of fun. And I'm really glad that I decided to check it out because it was entertaining. I blew by the season very quickly. I literally binged the whole thing in like 2 days, which is very rare for me with anime nowadays. And it was fun. I had such a good flippin' time. Every episode, for the most part, had something to enjoy. And yeah, I just really liked it. That's all I can really say without spoiling anything. So we're just going to the spoiler section now. Here's the timestamp to one of the spoilers, and if you have seen the show, I recommend sticking around and hear my thoughts, or if you don't mind spoilers, you can stick around as well. But if you don't want spoilers, just skip to the end so you don't get any spoilers. But again, if you have seen it or you don't mind spoilers, you can stick around and hear my thoughts from there, and you can talk about if you agree or disagree in the comments. So yeah, I'm going to count up for 5 and enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So, going over the stories now that I can actually talk about them, I mentioned that there are some darker toned stories in there, and one of which is the backstory of Oken, a character I didn't hate in season 1, but I felt like he just was kinda meh. And this side story thing ended up creating a whole episode that was dedicated just to describing his backstory and how he ended up in the same position he was throughout the show in the main series. And honestly, it was such a sad story, and yet I was so freaking invested. It just reminded me that Ranking of Kings can do a great job to keep you invested in characters, not just Bojji. Like, every single character has some kind of story they can tell, and I just really enjoy it. I just found all of Oken's story just so heartbreaking in a way, as he didn't want to go crazy, but he did. And it really adds a lot, especially to what happens later in the season, which we'll talk about in a bit, where it just amazes me how much more time and dedication this series gave to Oken, as it just was truly interesting and very entertaining to watch, as it definitely was by far the biggest highlight of this season. But moving past that for now, some other things I want to talk about, some negative, some positive, is I guess we'll start with the negative here, and that's sometimes where they would change art style for background character stories. like later on in this special season thing, they have a whole minor story dedicated to focusing on Boji's parents, you know, his dead mom and his dead dad. And it was fine. It changed the art style a bit to look more like a fairy tale book. And I don't know, just for me personally, I didn't think it was that great. I thought the whole story just kind of dragged. It didn't really add anything to the overall plot of the show. It just kind of was there. It just tells us more about Boji's parents and who they were, which I didn't mind particularly, but I don't know. It was fine. And it's kind of sad that that episode was one that I didn't really care too much about, since the next episode that changed the art style around in order to convey their message was actually one where we focused on Moranjo, who kind of goes a bit deeper into her backstory about the demon she met. And yeah, I didn't care for that much either. Even though the art style was changed to really match the tone of what was going on, I just didn't care. I don't know, every single time the art style would change from the one it was used in the show, like the actual full-on art style of the show, I just found myself uninterested, and I just could get into it, and it was weird. I don't know why. It's not like the stories themselves were particularly bad. I guess it's just that I didn't care much for Moranjo or Boji's parents that much, but Another episode I could think of that I wasn't super big on was probably the episode where Kage has like this dream of his where after he is chased down by some kids and worried that everyone sees him as a monster of sorts, he ends up saving some kids, and a knight saves him after that. And it's during his childhood, and after he sees that knight save him, he's just like, I want to become a knight now. And that's basically the whole like 10, 12 or so minutes of that storyline. And I just think, wow, we just wasted all that time just for him to decide he wanted to become a knight, even though he didn't in the end because we know his backstory. And maybe it comes into play later. I don't know. It might. But I just felt like that story was actual filler for the story. And I don't know. Just some of the stories inside of this special season, while most of them were quite enjoyable, such as Daida and Boji having a brother-to-brother interaction where Daida wants to learn how to heal people and he struggles with it, but then he ends up healing Boji after an incident. That stuff was really nice. I thought it was really interesting and just fun to watch. I thought it was entertaining to see these characters interact with one another. However, there were other episodes where I just don't care. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a pretty solid time overall, as there were lots of really good episodes in there too, such as the final episode, which actually gives closure to Oken's story. Basically, at the end of the first season of the show, his head gets eaten by a giant fish, and they end up trying to track his head down with his body, and it's revealed that his older brother Desha, or Desha, I don't know how you pronounce it, but basically, he ends up saving him and giving him his sanity back, but in exchange, giving away all of his memories. And it kind of gave closure to that whole storyline, as Oken was seemingly unable to pull anything off. It seemed like it was impossible for him to make it back, but then they make him get back at the end of the season as a little bit of closure to his character, even though it's now revealed that now Desha, or Desha, however you want to pronounce it, is now off somewhere with no memories of who he was, just out and about. No one knows where he is. And it was just a really good episode, since it was the only episode of the whole season that kind of took place after the events of the first season, which kind of made it almost like a episode 1 of season 2 type thing, which it could have been set up for, but it's at the end of the season, and honestly, it was probably the best episode of this whole season. But moving past that for now, since I'm just really glad that they did that, and it definitely felt like a pretty satisfying final episode, I want to talk about a few other minor things that I enjoyed, such as how quickly this whole show went by. Like, just like season 1 of the original series, which even though I had to stop for a little while and eventually came back, when I started this, it blew by in the blink of an eye. As I mentioned earlier on, I finished this in like 2 days. It was very fast. I just had such a great time. It was hard to really put it down. I was enjoying myself a lot. There were so many great stories in there that really kept me interested, and especially the stuff with Oken and all of that. It was really interesting, and I had so much fun with it. And it makes me a bit sad that we didn't get too much of new content, but for what we got in terms of what was there, like the content that was just kind of cut out from the first season, it was fun. I had such a good time, and while it's not perfect, there are definitely some stories in there that I don't care too much about. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun season, and while it's not as good as the main storyline, which I'd rather have a season 2, this was fun. I was expecting to go into this not liking it that much, expecting to just have a bunch of stories where stuff was just kind of happening and I wouldn't care too much about it. But then, as I kept watching, I got more interested in all these characters and their daily lives, and it was fun. I genuinely had such a good time, especially with seeing all the developments with some of these characters. Like how Daida in one of the stories reveals that, yeah, he's grown a lot as a person. Now no longer looking up to his father, but instead looking up to his brother as the guiding light to what a king should be. And also there's stuff with Miranjo, where we do see some of her growth as a character after, you know, causing a lot of problems, but then just being forgiven because Daida wanted her to be forgiven. It was still really nice to see her character's growth, especially now that she seems like she's going to kind of be like a teacher. And it was just nice. The whole season was nice. It was just a fun little after dinner mint or something like that, I guess you could say. It's like after a nice meal, it was an after meal mint. It was just a nice little extra edition that was fun to watch. And yeah, that's all we have to say. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? Overall, a fun little season. It's not as good as the main series, but if you're someone who enjoys the characters of that world, Bojji, Daida, and everyone else, you're probably gonna have fun like I did. Like, I genuinely had a good time. There were lots of really nice stories in there, and I thought it was just fun. I thought it was an entertaining time. It got the point across, and it was fun. And that's why I give Ranking of Kings, The Treasure Chest of Courage, an 8 out of 10. It was fun, and I had a good time while watching. And as I said before, if you like the first season of Ranking of Kings, I think you might like this as well. And yeah, that's all I have to say, and thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I also do anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!